who has a developmental disability, who is also black, pinning him to the ground. They were trying to search his backpack, and he let him search it once, and then he said no, which you're legally allowed to do, of course, to not consent to a search. And they arrested him for his trouble, put him in the back of the seat, put him in the back of a paddy wagon while he's banging his head, screaming. And you can see the police on the videotape standing there, seemingly unconcerned for this child's life. So and even when you drive, there hasn't been these kind of high-profile instances of police brutality that we've seen make the national news, but there's been lots of these, what I would still call police violence, that crop up. But in such a place like Broome County, oftentimes we don't hear about them. So just because we don't know that and there's also been other instances that you can see on video of women being a black woman was assaulted by police officers at the YWCA in front of her child, right? These are very, very disturbing and upsetting, but these are fairly routine kind of instances.
But the police are equipped with body cams and dash cams?
Indeed. In New York State, however, they control the footage, police. Right. And it's been relatively difficult in New York State to get the videotapes. They have to be released kind of during discovery if there's a case that's going forward. But the last time, these are always evolving. But for a while, they considered the body camera footage part of the officer's personnel file, which aren't allowed to be legally released. So the body cameras, at least here, don't seem to have produced the type of accountability that they were supposed to. They're not available routinely to the public.
Yeah, which is something that's going on nationwide. We have a case in D.C. right now where an unarmed man was killed by police, and they refusing to release it to the public. And even the family members, they limited the number of family members that were allowed to come in the room and watch the video. And then here in Las Vegas, we just had Byron Williams was the last thing you saw on the cop's body cam was it was dark out, and they had their knees at his chest, and he's screaming, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." Mm-hmm. Cameras go off. They come back on. It's light out, and EMS is there working on the guy, and the guy dies in police custody. So there needs to be a nationwide. People are unaware of this. They think that this is a public record. It's available to everybody, but it's not.
No, it's not. Yeah. And what they're doing in New York in particular, it's been very difficult to get any police records, disciplinary records or otherwise. They're starting to change that now, and we do in New York. There has to, if there's an in custody death, the attorney general is tasked with investigating it rather than the local DA, which is better, we'll say. But yeah, the body camera kind of revolution that happened quite quickly, I think it's fair to say, has not been shown, and there's academic studies that cast serious doubt on if they've actually prevented any sort of police brutality at all. We just happen to see it a little bit more, and it looks like officers are now being held accountable, but it's not clear that these instances are going down because of the body cameras.
Now, the trouble you have in there in the facilities, is this limited to one facility, a county facility, or is it across the board?
Yeah, well, this is what I typically I study jails in addition to doing the advocacy work, but I study them on a at least on a statewide level. The thing with local, these are county jails, right? Okay. That we have, every county in New York State is mandated to have a county jail. This is, of course, different from the prison system, which is run by, simply out of the executive's office, the Department of Corrections. But these local facilities simply have no oversight at all, except for sometimes counties have some oversight from elected officials. Presumably there should be, that's gotten through the budgetary process because, of course, they're paid for by taxpayer dollars. and they have to be appropriate. The funds have to be appropriated annually, and our county budget is, a huge chunk of it goes to the sheriff's office. It's astounding, actually. But there's, for example, because our sheriff here is the de facto leader of the Republican Party, which some people might argue with, but he's given great deference because he's been here for a long time. He's working on his third pension or something like this, third state pension. And because he was a trooper before that, and then he retired from that, and then became a deputy, and then ran for sheriff, and he's been the sheriff since the 90s or something, right? So he's been there for a long time.
And they reelected him, so the public up there must be tolerant of this.
There's no one to run against him, frankly. Actually, the last time a former mayor of Binghamton, who was also a lawyer, he ran an ad hoc campaign on, a third party line, the Working Families Party, the left wing of the Democratic Party, but he couldn't even get on the Democratic line. And he garnered something like, he garnered over 20%. And he didn't really run a campaign, but he was the only one running besides the current sheriff. So there's been a real problem running someone against the man, and I think a vigorous campaign could have unseated him. It's likely that he'll retire. He's in his 80s now, so it's likely that I don't think he will. But the level of unconcern and the level of obfuscation that's been put out to the public by the sheriff is truly astounding. At one point, he was confronted on camera about these deaths, and the reporter asked him, how many? What are the names of the people that have died? The man didn't know. He had to. You see him on camera fumbling to. These were people that didn't die, that had died like last week, right? And he couldn't. He didn't know the names of the people that died. I think if I ran a facility, I would know the names of the people that died under my care. He said something along the lines of, well, you come and pick on the jail when people die, but people die in the hospital all the time. Why aren't you parked outside of there and asking them about why so many people die in the hospital? This is the type of rhetoric that's coming out from the sheriff. He routinely lies about conditions. Just recently, the sheriff's office had to demote an officer for inappropriate conduct with incarcerated women, after we'd been launching a campaign for a long time about the conditions that women are held in. And he sent back a letter saying, oh, no, everything's fine in here, nothing to see here. And then this happens the week after, right? They truly, it's clear to me that they simply do not care about the people they're incarcerating, even though 90% of the people that go into this facility come out, and 100% and within a year, and almost 100% of the people are going to come back to this county at some point, and here and as in everywhere, it makes life worse for them and for our county.
Now, we talked about body cams and dashboard cams. What about within the facilities? Any kind of documentation going on of what's going on in there? It's not even a... They
are. Yeah. There are cameras in the facility, and they can be gotten, but not through a standard FOIA request. It has to be through a lawsuit. So there's a case of a man who died last year, almost a year ago, January 29. He died in 2019. I actually have the exact date, 1/22/2019. His name was Robert Card, and we've been told that there's facility footage of him as he was pleading for help and dying in medical.
Yeah, and then you mentioned this before, that it's mostly a lack of medical care that people are dying in there.
Yeah, so let me. Rob Card's death is the one that we have the most information about at the moment. So Rob Card, he he was on probation for a petty theft and a low-level drug offense. He was found with drugs on him, but a misdemeanor charge. He went into drug court, which is a high level of surveillance. He was being regularly, tested for drugs, and he was also at the same time a skilled carpenter, and had been, was working. He ended up developing a brain tumor several months into his probation, and it wasn't looking good. But he had a brain tumor. He had moments when he forgot who he was, where he was, right? And he ended up getting picked up for a probation violation for two very minor misdemeanor infractions and incarcerated in early January of 2019. While he was in there, he reported that he had a brain tumor. He told them several times. It's documented. And then while he was inside, he also had an abscessed tooth. So here's a man who, and he started having medical problems almost immediately, having seizures regularly, within, a day of being in the facility. They eventually were trying to get the medical records from the hospital. But while he was in there, the only treatment that he was given was Tylenol.
Yeah.
Sometimes he had to buy it himself. He was clearly, at one point he had a seizure or potentially a stroke, and he lost control over part of his body. He became incontinent. The other incarcerated people had to help him dress and clean himself up and all these things. He also has an abscess too, so his face was blown up, right, inflamed. He was in constant medical trouble from the day he walked in the facility, and all they would do was give him Tylenol. Sometimes he had to pay for it himself. They put him in medical a number of times. That he was coded a number of times. They had to call like a code to have emergency medical people respond. He ends up in the medical unit, and sometimes they would come and he didn't know where he was. He didn't know what was going on around him. He would have a temperature. It was clear that he was in real trouble. And a few times he said, "I don't want the Tylenol," because Tylenol for a brain tumor isn't the most effective treatment option. And then he goes into he's only been in the facility for about 10 days, and he goes into a grand mal seizure. Or a grand mal stroke, or a massive stroke, and he's in distress for 12 hours or something like this. They finally call the ambulance. He's taken out, goes to the hospital. He's still under custody at that point, and then they release him while he's in the hospital. And then they finally inform his family. And he dies. He's declared dead the next day, even though they keep his body alive so he could donate organs. But the reason why you do this, right, is so that a report doesn't have to be filed to the state. If they die in custody, a report has to be filed, but they released him so that there was no investigation that was going to be done.
Oh, that's fascinating. Right? Okay, so they knew the clock was ticking there, and they put through some release forms, so that now there's no investigation.
Yeah, and actually, it's even worse than that.
Okay.
He was released from the facility on a Sunday. I believe it was the AFC Championship game between the Patriots and Kansas City last year, right? So you're talking he's released on a day. A lot of people are saying watching football. They have a judge text to an officer that Rob Card should be released. A judge.
Okay. Now, let me ask you a question. 'Cause there's no way this is the first time this has happened. Is there any way to track this and figure out how many other times? Because that's no one thought